Well, welcome everyone. Let's go ahead and get started. My name is Julie, and I'm an educator with the Eisenhower Foundation in Abilene, Kansas. I'm coming to you from the Dwight D. Eisenhower Presidential Library here in Abilene. Most of you probably know that Dwight Eisenhower was our 34th President of the United States. But before that, he was the Supreme Allied Commander in World War II. And at the end of the war, he and some of his troops had the unimaginable experience of touring a Nazi concentration camp about 81 years ago. The shock and disgust he felt compelled him to ensure that the Holocaust be documented for all to know and remember. So today we're going to be taking a look at some of that documentation. These documents are called primary sources because they all came directly from those who witnessed the atrocities of the Holocaust firsthand. We will also see how that documentation impacted the rest of the world. If you have this primary source sheet that goes along with this program, go ahead and get that out in a pencil. We're going to be using this as kind of our note-taking sheet as we go through and take a look at the different primary sources. We're going to put a short description of what they are and how they verify the Holocaust. How are they important? If this was a case to be solved, how would it support the case for the Holocaust? All right. Well, there is denial and distortion about the Holocaust now, unfortunately, and there was then as well. And that denial kind of threatens our ideals of democracy and individual human rights. Let me share some statistics with you that reflects what 18 to 35-year-olds believe about the Holocaust. 10% believe that the Holocaust never happened. 11% think that the Jews are responsible for the Holocaust, not the Nazis. 23% think that it's a myth, it's a conspiracy. Maybe there were some people killed, but not nearly the millions that history records. 49%, almost half, have seen Holocaust distortion and misinformation in social media. And maybe you have too. Maybe you're not quite sure what you believe or how much you even know about the Holocaust. So the survey I just gave you was conducted by the Claims Conference. It's a Jewish group. And I'd like to show you a video that kind of supports some of these statistics. This video was taken from a college campus.
Studies say that 1/5 of Gen Zers deny the Holocaust, and over half think that what's happening in Gaza is a genocide. Do you think Holocaust happened?
Nope. No, I gotta see it to believe it. There's a lot of gray area in that debate.
What's the gray area you've heard?
It's about the whole Jew thing.
What have you heard? The Jews might have made it up, or?
Yeah.
So you think it might not have happened?
Yeah.
All right. Were you surprised by any of those comments or any of those statistics? As we look at actual primary sources from General Eisenhower and others, determine for yourself if the evidence proves that the Holocaust really happened. First, let's start with a brief overview of how the Holocaust started. As soon as Germany started World War II in 1939, Germans began segregating and targeting the Jewish population in Europe. This was a very gradual progression. It didn't happen overnight. It's kind of that frog in the boiling water analogy where the water heats up so gradually the frog doesn't realize how hot it's getting until it's too late. So it started with boycotting Jewish businesses, identifying them with the Jewish Star of David, which you see on this slide. All Jews were forced to wear this on their clothing so that the Nazis could easily identify them. They also established laws that only pertained to the Jewish people. what they could do, what they couldn't do, and there was severe punishment if they broke those laws. This was all leading up to the Nazis' ultimate goal, which was to exterminate all Jews located in German-occupied countries. This plan included sending Jews to ghettos and then to concentration camps and putting them into forced labor or killing them. This was called the final solution. As this was happening throughout the duration of the war, there were some rumors going around. Stories were getting out that terrible things were happening in these concentration camps. But no one in their wildest imagination could have guessed what was actually happening. After the invasion on Normandy Beach, which was known as D-Day, the Allies were able to start pushing the German army back. As the German army was forced to retreat, the truth about what was happening at concentration camps began to be uncovered. So the first primary sources that we're going to take a look at are photographs. And on your primary source sheet, that has been filled in for you. Description, these are all photographs taken at the Ohrdruf concentration camp. The Ohrdruf camp was the first Nazi camp liberated by United States troops. And there were a lot of pictures taken at Ohrdruf. We'll get to see a few of them. The Ohrdruf camp was built in November of 1944, the very end of the war. Ohrdruf was built to supply forced labor. So the prisoners there were building a railway to a proposed German communication center. But because of the Allies' advances into Germany, that communications center was never built. In late March, the population at that camp was over 10,000. But by early April, as the Allies advanced into Germany, the SS, who were the German guards in charge of the concentration camps, evacuated almost all the prisoners on death marches to the Buchenwald camp. So those prisoners that were too ill to walk to the rail cars to be shipped out and to be relocated were just killed. And so as you see in this picture, they just fell where they were shot. This was happening in concentration camps all over Europe as Nazis scrambled to cover up what they had done at these camps. This is a picture of one of the railroad cars that took some of the prisoners to the larger camps to be exterminated. So on April 4th, 1945, the Ohrdruf camp was discovered by American soldiers. The discovery of this camp opened the eyes of many United States soldiers to the horrors that had been perpetrated by the Nazis during the Holocaust. When American soldiers entered the camp, they found the decomposing remains of hundreds of murdered prisoners, as you can see pictured here. They also found the camp's surviving prisoners who were starving, emaciated, and in need of medical attention. So some of the prisoners were just left there to die, basically. A few days later, General Eisenhower, General Bradley, and General Patton visited that camp after they had heard of the soldiers' discovery. General Eisenhower was quoted as saying, "Nothing has ever shaken me like this." Let's take a look at what he saw. So it was on April 12th, 1945, that Dwight Eisenhower and Generals Bradley and Patton went to visit Ohrdruf. What the Allied generals found were thousands of naked, emaciated bodies in shallow graves. The Nazis had tried to bury them as quickly as possible. Eisenhower viewed various torture devices, such as a butcher's block for smashing the gold fillings from the mouths of dead prisoners. What you need to know is that the SS took everything they could take from the prisoners. They took all of their clothes, they shaved off all of their hair, they took all of their belongings, they even took their names and replaced them with numbers. Whatever they could take from the bodies of dead prisoners they took, like the gold fillings out of their teeth, even their tattoos. General Patton became physically ill and could not continue. General Eisenhower turned white and felt sick, but he knew he had to continue and see everything. So this shed was where corpses of the prisoners were kept until they were burned. And they were sprinkled with lime in an attempt to reduce the smell. However, it's been told that the lime really didn't do much to reduce the smell. In this picture, General Eisenhower is listening to the explanation of how the gallows were used to kill prisoners. There were often public executions in concentration camps to set an example for the rest of the prisoners. So, to enforce that they were powerless and they needed to follow the commands of the SS guards. The German SS camp guards had quickly made a grid from railroad tracks that had been used to burn corpses of inmates from the mass graves in an attempt to hide their crimes. This is a photo of the inside of one of the barracks that shows the prisoners' sleeping arrangements on the floor. So very basic living conditions there. All right, so in the column that says, what does it verify? What do these pictures show? What do we learn about that particular concentration camp from those pictures? And, bear in mind, this was in 1944, 45. There wasn't any Photoshop, there was no AI, so the pictures couldn't be changed or altered. What you see is what the photographer saw. All right, let's go on to our next primary source. This is an original film clip. This was taken the day that General Eisenhower, General Patton, and General Bradley visited the camp. General Eisenhower wanted someone with it was just an old-time movie camera to come and take film of what he saw. So I'll show you this film. It does not have sound, so you're going to see what happened, and I'll try to narrate a little bit as we watch. So this is like one of the pictures we saw. This was a torture device. The man in the striped jacket was a prisoner there, and they're demonstrating, both of them were prisoners, and they're demonstrating how that was used as a torture device. The man on the left was a prisoner, and he's talking about what happened, and then an interpreter is telling General Eisenhower. These people were just shot and killed, and they fell where they were shot. All of the other people you see there are soldiers. Some of them were the soldiers who discovered the camp. So not only were the generals all witnesses to this, but all of those soldiers who were there as well. General Eisenhower answering questions of reporters. And you can see the barracks in the background. So you can only imagine what a shock it must have been for these soldiers to come across something like this. Never in your wildest imagination would you think you would ever see anything like that. And you can see their somber expressions, kind of disbelief there. So on the second line, if you put film, the description is a film of hors d'oeuvre. What does that verify to you? What did that prove? If this was used as evidence, what would it support? Okay, let's go on to our third primary source. This is an official military letter. It's a report that General Eisenhower wrote to General George Marshall. He was the Army Chief of Staff under President Roosevelt. As the Supreme Allied Commander, General Eisenhower had to make regular reports about how the war was going, what was happening. As you can see, this was stamped secret, which meant only people with certain clearance could read this letter. Since then, it has been declassified so that it's available for all to see. This is from our archives here in the library. On the second page, the highlighted paragraph is what we're going to focus on today. This is where General Eisenhower talks about what he saw at the hors d'oeuvre camp. This letter, if you see at the top of the first page, was written the 15th of April, 1945, so just 3 days after he visited hors d'oeuvre. In it, he also talks about the German treasure that was found in salt mines. What he's referring to there, Nazis also took millions of pieces of artwork, which they stored in the salt mines during the war, and US troops came across some of that too and showed that to General Eisenhower. I have a voiceover reading this. It's not General Eisenhower's voice, but the voice will read that highlighted paragraph.
On a recent tour of the forward areas in 1st and 3rd Armies, I stopped momentarily at the salt mines to take a look at the German treasure. There is a lot of it. But the most interesting, although horrible sight that I encountered during the trip was a visit to a German internment camp near Gotha. The things I saw beggar description. While I was touring the camp, I encountered 3 men who had been inmates and by one ruse or another had made their escape. I interviewed them through an interpreter. The visual evidence and the verbal testimony of starvation, cruelty, and bestiality were so overpowering as to leave me a bit sick. In one room where they were piled up 20 or 30 naked men, killed by starvation. George Patton would not even enter. He said he would get sick if he did so. I made the visit deliberately, in order to be in position to give first-hand evidence of these things if ever, in the future, there develops a tendency to charge these allegations merely to propaganda.
Okay, so General Eisenhower knew, no matter how sick he felt, how much he didn't want to go on, he knew he had to see these things. He said his fear was that these allegations would be thought of as propaganda. Why was he afraid that this would just be considered propaganda, that no one would believe him? Who do you think might accuse him of just telling stories? You could put your answers in the chat, or if you want to turn on your microphone and let me know what your thoughts are. Why might this be just considered made up propaganda? Who might say this is propaganda? The Nazis, right? Germany, thinking you just want to make us look bad. You're just making this up so the world, sees us in a bad light. It's just your word against ours. So General Eisenhower had a plan for that. We're going to get to that in just a minute. First, I do want to show you this. This quote from General Eisenhower is on the exterior Hall of Remembrance at the Holocaust Memorial Museum. Yes, someone just typed in Nazis, right, would consider that propaganda. Good, yeah. So this is on the exterior Hall of Remembrance at the Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C. The quote that starts with, "The things I saw beggar description." If you ever have a chance to go, I highly encourage you to go. It's such an impactful place, just full of incredible things from the Holocaust. So definitely worth your time to go if you're in Washington, D.C. All right, so General Eisenhower is very worried about, if he was to talk about what he saw, it would be considered propaganda. He's the United States general, the Allied general. He's just saying these things to make the Nazis look bad. So this was part of the plan of trying to get this information out. This is a SHAEF message. SHAEF stands for Supreme Headquarters, Allied Expeditionary Force. And if you look at the top, it says from SHAEF, originator, Supreme Commander, DDE. The date is the 19th of April. So a few days later, as you can see, top secret, eyes only. This was also sent to General Marshall. It is a cable. Cables at that time were under the sea lines that were considered the most secure way to send highly classified secret information. Sometimes the enemy would find the cable and cut it, but this was generally the most secure way to send information. So this was highly secret message here from General Eisenhower to General Marshall. And again, I have a voiceover reading this.
We continue to uncover concentration camps for political prisoners in which conditions of indescribable horror prevail. From Eisenhower to General Marshall, for eyes only. I visited one of these myself, and I assure you that whatever has been printed on them to date is an understatement. If you would see any advantage of asking about a dozen leaders of Congress and a dozen prominent editors to make a short visit to this theater in a couple of C-54s, I will arrange to have them conducted to one of these places where the evidence of bestiality and cruelty is so overpowering as to leave no doubt in their minds about the normal practices of Germans in these camps. I am hopeful that some British individuals in similar categories will visit the northern area to witness similar evidence of atrocity.
Okay, so what did Eisenhower want Marshall to do? What was his plan to get this out? So it wouldn't be just his word. It would be whose? What did he want to have happen here? What is he asking General Marshall to do in this cable that he sent? Go ahead and put your answers in the chat. He definitely wants British people to take a look at the concentration camps throughout Europe. Who else?
Having witnesses is proof.
Right, witnesses. Right. In particular, he wants about a dozen leaders of Congress. Okay, so in 1945, these are highly respected people. He also wants prominent editors, people involved in the news. At that time, the media was also highly respected. There were prominent people in the news industry that everyone trusted and believed. If they would go over there and document this and put it in the papers and publicize it and tell people what was happening, then it wouldn't be just Eisenhower's word, right? You have trusted leaders that would also be saying the same thing. Our next primary source is a little different. This is a first-hand account in the form of a personal letter. These letters, these are from our archives here in the library, written by Harold Porter. He served in World War II with the 116th Evacuation Hospital, and he was stationed at Dachau concentration camp. After the SS evacuated these camps and left, as we learned in Ordruff, there were prisoners left behind. Basically, they were just left there to die. They were either very sick or too weak to do anything except maybe just lay in bed. And so General Eisenhower and other generals sent soldiers with medical knowledge to be stationed at these concentration camps and give medical help and assistance to these prisoners who had been left behind. Harold was one of those soldiers. In these letters that he wrote to his parents, he describes sometimes in very graphic words what he saw. Some of the letters were so graphic we didn't include them. But the thing about a personal letter, especially as a son writing to his parents, is that he shares exactly how he feels. He doesn't spare his feelings. And so I'm going to share a couple of excerpts from some of his letters. And again, I have a voiceover reading those letters.
7 April 1945. Dear Mother and Father, you have, by this time, received a letter mentioning that I am quartered in the concentration camp at Dachau. It is still undecided whether we will be permitted to describe the conditions here, but I'm writing this now to tell you a little, and will mail it later when we are told we can. It is difficult to know how to begin. By this time I have recovered from my first emotional shock, and am able to write without seeming like a hysterical gibbering idiot. Yet, I know you will hesitate to believe me, no matter how objective and factual I try to be. I even find myself trying to deny what I am looking at with my own eyes. Certainly, what I have seen in the past few days will affect my personality for the rest of my life. We knew a day or two before we moved that we were going to operate in Dachau, and that it was the location of one of the most notorious concentration camps. But while we expected things to be grisly, I'm sure none of us knew what was coming. It is easy to read about atrocities, but they must be seen before they can be believed. I've seen worse sights than any be described.
Okay, so what in his letter proved how awful the conditions were? What did he say in his letter that told you it was a horrible sight, a horrible place to be? Remember, he's a pretty young soldier at this time, probably around 20. If you look at that stationery, you can see at the top some words written in German. That's because when the SS evacuated and left, they left everything there. And so he was using a desk that an SS officer had and using some stationery he found in that desk. So what in his letter tells you about this camp and how bad it is? He talks about recovering from his first emotional shock, right? It must have been an incredible shock. That it would change his personality for the rest of his life. I think that last line also, I've seen worse sights than any be described. Let's go on to another letter.
10th of May, 1945. Dear Mother and Father, I've told you before about the thousands of dead bodies here. They are not nearly so ghastly nor horrible as our patients, the living corpses. Gandhi, after a 30-day fast, would still look like Hercules when compared with some of these men. It's unbelievable that they could still be alive.
Okay, so this letter was dated the 10th of May. So this is a month later, and still there are prisoners there who are still very weak, very sick. Let's go to our last letter.
15th of May, each had an orange for breakfast the other day. Everyone was excited, but some were too weak to even peel theirs. More and more of them are beginning to look like people and less like animals. We have patient or prisoner ward boys to assist us now, and things are going a little easier. Perhaps you'll see much of this in the newsreels. If so, you'll miss the most grisly part. An article in Stars and Stripes says that the Hayes office has decided you couldn't take it. Love, Harold.
All right, so he's been there about 6 weeks, and finally he's starting to see some improvement, right? He refers to the Stars and Stripes. That is a newspaper printed for those serving in the military. He also refers to someone named Hayes. Hayes was a general in World War II who helped disseminate some of the war information coming out of Europe. And he said, this is so terrible, so awful. I don't even think we should tell the people in the United States because they wouldn't be able to take it. All right, our next primary source is also a firsthand account. This is an oral history video. So this video is of Frank Hamburger. It's an interview that he did in the 1980s, about 30 years after World War II ended. And he talks about going to see the Ohrdruf concentration camp. And I want you to notice as you listen to him, even though it's been 30 years, he still gets kind of an emotional. At one point, he kind of has to swallow before he can go on. It just had that much of an impact on him at that time.
Well, we were in what was East Germany, and word came down that a camp had been opened up at a place called Ohrdruf, and that Eisenhower and several of the other generals had been there and suggested that every soldier who could possibly see the camp should go. And a day or two later, we were within a few miles of the camp, and I went over. Well, I guess as we came up the dirt road along a railroad track, there were bodies along in the ditch and on the edge of the road, evidently people that had been fleeing the camp and had died or been killed on the way. And then we went into camp. There were bodies laying all around. And there was a small building where they had burned bodies. And walking out around the camp, there was a burning pyre, which is the first picture you have as you come into this museum, where they had burned bodies of the prisoners. And I remember that there was a German plowing in his field up the hill from the crematorium.
Okay, so it's interesting, he mentioned the farmer plowing in his field. It was very typical that surrounding communities near the concentration camps had no idea what was going on. They were that well hidden and kept a secret. All right, next primary source, newspaper articles. So newspaper articles like the one seen here can be a primary source, depending on the source of information. You kind of have to be careful with newspaper articles. If they come from a source who was there and is giving firsthand information, yes, they are absolutely primary sources, such as this one. Editor's son describes Nazi terrorism at Ohrdruf. The person who wrote this was a soldier. Happened to be the son of a newspaper editor and wrote firsthand knowledge about what he experienced at Ohrdruf. Pilots tell of Nazi cruelty. Again, firsthand experience of what they saw and experienced. Those are primary sources. Some newspaper articles, however, are secondary sources. If they're kind of reporting on what they heard from somebody or giving opinions about something, those would be secondary sources. All right, so some of the most powerful primary sources are artifacts. And of course, I wish I had these artifacts here to actually show you, but I don't. These all are artifacts that are from the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. They were given to the museum by concentration camp prisoners. So these are actual artifacts that came from concentration camps. And of course, you probably recognize that striped jacket that we saw earlier in the film. That was what prisoners were given to wear. Men usually wore striped caps, like the picture in the middle. There is a knife. The interesting thing about this knife is that it was made by a prisoner. The prisoner found some scrap metal and fashioned it into a knife. The purpose of it was to cut up his or her rations so that maybe there was another prisoner in their barracks that was too sick to get food for themselves. Part of that food could go to them, or maybe part of the food could be saved for later. The skirt in the bottom has a really interesting story. So even though the Nazis tried to take away everything, this woman wanted to express a little bit of her individuality. She managed to get enough fabric from the hem of the skirt to put pockets on the skirt. The skirts normally did not have pockets on them, but she individualized it so that it would. The comb is one of my favorite artifacts. The comb was made by a girl who was working in a factory that made planes. So she was sentenced to forced labor. She took metal from an airplane blade and made it into a comb. Here's the impactful thing about this comb, however. All of her hair had just been shaved off. She had no hair. But she made the comb anyway because she had the faith, the resilience, the hope that she would live to see her hair grow and this comb would be needed. I just think that's a fantastic story of the resilience of some of these people and the will to live through all of this. That poster you see in the bottom corner is actually what was used by the SS guards, the Nazi guards, to identify the prisoners. So if you look back at that jacket, you'll notice a tag sewed on the front. It has a number, that's the prisoner's number, and then there's a little symbol there as well. So this chart would tell the soldiers as much information as they could about that prisoner. The different colors indicated what country they were from. There was also a symbol that indicated if they were Jewish or what religion they were. There was a symbol that might indicate that they were a prisoner who had maybe spoken out against the Nazi government. And that would certainly put you in prison as well. So every prisoner was labeled with a number and then some kind of identification. Because of Eisenhower's insistence that others see and document what he saw, the world soon realized what had been happening under Nazi rule across Europe. This documentation did several things of historical significance. So the first thing it did was it revealed the horrors of the Holocaust to the whole world. It wasn't a secret anymore. Everybody knew now what had been going on in the concentration camps. It impacted Allied war efforts. After seeing these concentration camps for themselves, Allied soldiers were more determined than ever to defeat Nazi Germany. And as General Eisenhower was quoted, and you can see that quote on this slide, "We are told the American soldier does not know what he is fighting for. Now at least we know what he is fighting against." It confirmed Allied intelligence reports. So remember at the first of the program I said there were rumors going around that some bad things were happening. Well, this proved what had been happening, that the rumors weren't rumors. And then finally, it provided documentation for the prosecution of Nazi war crimes. The Nuremberg trials, which happened after the war, 1945 to 1946, resulted in the conviction of 19 of 22 major Nazi leaders indicted by the International Military Tribunal. 12 of them were sentenced to death by hanging, 3 to life imprisonment, and 4 to long-term prison sentences. And I have one last primary source to share with you.
I have never felt able to describe my emotional reactions when I first came face to face with indisputable evidence of Nazi brutality and ruthless disregard of every shred of decency. Up to that time, I had known about it only generally or through secondary sources. I am certain, however, that I have never, at any other time, experienced an equal sense of shock.
So that last primary source is a book written by General Eisenhower about his experiences during World War II called Crusade in Europe. And in that book, he talks about the shock that he experienced upon his visit at Ohrdruf concentration camp. I think especially through what he saw there, one of his most famous quotes, which we have in our museum here, is, "I hate war as only a soldier who has lived it can." He saw the horrors of war, and that being when he became president, he worked very hard to maintain peace in our country and throughout the world. All right, we're going to go back to that university that we saw the video of in the beginning of our program. Those students are in for a little surprise.
I actually have a surprise for you.
Oh,
This is a good friend of
Sammy.
mine, Sammy. He is a Holocaust survivor.
Let me put it in a different way that we can understand. If you would be silent for every victim of the Holocaust, 6 million minutes, you would be silent for 11 and a half years.
Wow.
6 million Jews. That's almost as many people in New York City.
That's a lot of people.
You see all the people here? Let's assume that you are here in the camp. The commander would come and be in the middle. Just point right, left. One group of people would be murdered right away. The second one would become slaves. In the labor camp, people died of starvation, were worked to death, beaten to death to follow instructions, and at the same time they were used as a shooting target. I was subjected to medical experiments. You look at me right now, but you would never know that I'm in constant pain every single second of my life. At the same time, my life was saved by a German woman.
I feel like I have to educate myself.
Does the media have a role in you believing what you believe?
Yeah, a lot around TikTok.
Wow, so that's where you got a lot of your conspiracies from.
Yes, sir.
Wait, do you think that's why Gen Z is so much denial? Is TikTok a big part of it?
Yeah.
Wow.
Why do we have to talk about the Holocaust forever and ever? Why?
So you can make sure it doesn't happen again?
Years ago, I went to Auschwitz where I met a 96-year-old Holocaust survivor whose whole family had died there. And I promised him I would never let that happen again.
It is the best example what hate can do to a person, to a group of people, to a nation, and to the world. My job is to educate the next generation. What is important, at least from my perspective, is that whatever you heard, you will learn more about it, and you will spread the truth to other students.
We all are human.
From Holocaust denial to hugging a Holocaust survivor. This is what education looks like.
Yes, sir. I learned a little bit more about the Holocaust today, man. I learned some things I didn't know.
Holocaust was the biggest genocide in human history, and unfortunately, there's very few survivors left. Sammy, what would you say to this next generation?
My role in life right now is to educate the young people to make sure they will be not only knowledgeable, but at the same time active to be able to prevent future tragedies.
Thank you for watching, and continue to spread the truth.
All right. Well, we have taken a look at a lot of primary sources today. We looked at photographs, we looked at film footage, we looked at a military letter, personal letter, we looked at an oral history, we saw newspaper articles, we saw actual Holocaust artifacts, and then we heard from President Eisenhower through his book. Which of these primary sources do you think was the most impactful? Which one do you think showed the greatest proof of the Holocaust? Maybe you have one or two that you think were just really impactful. Go ahead and put your answers in the chat. They are all very different. But I think all very impactful as well. Any thoughts on that? If you have any questions, this might also be a good time to ask questions about General Eisenhower, his experience. All right. Well, I want to thank you very much for joining me today for our program, Documenting History. And I hope that learning a little bit about the Holocaust and its impact will give you, cause you to pause and think about what that knowledge can help you do as far as in your school or in your community, how you can help others. All right. Please join me again for another program. We will see you later. Have a great day.